Sangye Judan Zugi Jonam La Jandu Bad Hani Gyapsu Jim Tagi Chudan Gibe Zonam Ki Drola Bender Zange Bajo Zang. Okay, so begin again. So we finished. What was it? We finished lying. Is that we finished lying? We finished the section on lying. Is that correct? And then we've reached divisive speech. Okay. So yeah, just a reminder. We're still in this section of the 10 non-virtues, right? Which is we're dividing karma and contemplating the results of karma based on individual actions. The 10 non-virtuous actions, which then that comes together with the general characteristics of karma, and then those both come from establishing or generating faith in karma, the faith of conviction, which is the root of all happiness and goodness. That goes together with the section on the root of entering the path, which is taking refuge, right? Or training in refuge. And those both come from the way of relying on the method for happiness in future lifetimes, right? Which then goes together with thinking about how, generating the mind that wishes to have happiness in future lifetimes. So first of all, seeing why that's important, and now it's about how to do that, what to do to make the future life beneficial. And then those both come with from the general thought, the actual thinking about how to practice in the mind of the lower capable being. So we don't have to keep going back to that. We can start where we are. So today we're at divisive speech, right? So it just divides it like before into the basis, the thought, the intention. Well, the thought has three. That's the perception, intention, uh, and I guess he includes the action, the jorwa, or mentions the application within the thought. Is that correct? I think there should be the third thing should be the sorry. The third thing within the thought is the affliction, right? So he does very briefly here. It just says the same as before. So the thought includes the perception, the infliction, and the intention, and then the application, the completion. So semchen tumpadami tumpanamso. So it says the basis is people who are harmonious and also those who are not harmonious. So you could cause those who are or you could cause those who are not harmonious to become even less harmonious, or prevent them from reconciling. Now in the Vinaya, there's some. And so I don't know if you know, but for a Gelung anyway, it's a serious downfall if you bring two people together in a romantic relationship, right? If like matchmaker. So even within that, if you reconcile a couple who are split apart, that can actually fulfill the downfall of bringing two people together. So there was a question that came up for us when we had debated that, like, well, aren't you supposed to help people to reconcile their differences? Generally speaking, yes, but for one thing, you don't intentionally try to drive them apart, right? But it's also, so if a couple comes to you because they're having issues and they're saying we can't stand each other, we're fighting, it's up to them if they want to get back together. And you don't, as I said, you don't have to intentionally split them, but beyond acting as a person to help them reconcile their differences, not be angry. You shouldn't, as a monk, it's not really appropriate to be telling people who they should and should not be with, and appropriate to be telling people who they should and should not be with, and it's should I leave him versus they've already broken up and saying you should get back together with them, right? You're actually instigating the action. But it's an important distinction here. Usually, though, it's not going to be about couples, especially if you're a monastic. You're going to be dealing more with monks, other monks, or in some cases, if you're working in a center, you might be involved with the director of the center and the SPC, and they have some differences and something like that. So that's something to be aware of, because as I think we mentioned last week, it talks about that splitting the sangha is the most heavy of all negative actions. It's because divisiveness, as you can see, can cause tremendous problems in our country. It's at the moment it's a very big issue. We can see polarization, as they say. So it's often fomented, as we say. The people who are politicians sometimes intentionally create divisiveness as a way of getting popularity. That seems to be what's happened in India, from what I can tell. A lot of the issues between different groups, especially with Muslim groups, seems to be very much created by political issues, like in the 80s with the issue in Avodaya, you might know about, right? And the politicians gaining popularity on the basis of blaming other minority groups, and that seems to be happening more and more here. So that's very dangerous for the country. It's very problematic for people if there's this kind of divisiveness, and that leads to all kinds of other negative actions, right? So then, for example, the case with Avodaya, I don't know if the people instigating because I believe it was started with political. I don't know if you know anything about it, if you know, but I believe it was intentionally brought up as a politician, as a way of basically getting a platform that he could then become popular. But then, of course, it led to terrorist attacks. First, they blew up the mosque in Avodaya, and then there was retaliation, and they set a train on fire and things like that. So Once you encourage people to be disharmonious, then it can lead to all kinds of other negative actions. So anyway, sampala sumle. So then the thought, yeah. So first of all, the perception of the discrimination and the affliction are the same as before. So you have to correctly discriminate what it is. It also talks about in the Vinaya, and I would assume it's the same for the action. In Vinaya, doubt is considered the same as a correct perception, as long as it's doubt tending towards the fact. So you think, for example, if I think this book is probably his, I can't remember, but it's probably his. I'll just steal it. Then it's stealing. It's the same as whether or not as just actually having the intention, having the discrimination, and knowing that it's somebody else's. If you don't know, that's very different. If you're mistaken, but if you think it's probably so, then that's that counts as a correct discrimination. And then the affliction is what could be motivated by any of the three afflictions. So anger, that you just don't like people and you want them to be disharmonious. Maybe jealousy, you could say, oftentimes with relationships, that's what happens. And then you could say attachment, probably in the case of the politician, it's more about greed, that they're wanting to be popular or gain supporters. And then ignorance, that you just think this is a proper thing to do, or that you're helping people by dividing them. Okay, so then the intention, semchen tumbala yerodo batang semchemi tumbala mi dumbradobaho. So yeah, so it's for people who are harmonious, then you want to split them, lerodopa, and people who are not harmonious, midumbar. You don't want to reconcile them. Or really, it doesn't mean you don't want to reconcile them. You don't want them to be reconciled. That's quite a different thing. You're not just lazy, but you actually actively want to prevent them being reconciled. So Jorwani, Dempatami Dempitsi, Gaya Rongway. So either true words or untrue words. It could be a lie, or it could just be that you're speaking the truth, but it's in the unskillful way. Maybe it's better not to say anything at all, they say sometimes, rather than say the truth if it's going to divide people in that way. Jucha, nian, minyan, gangarong wajupa. And what you say could be pleasant or unpleasant. All right. You probably know about Iago. You ever read Shakespeare? Iago? No? Okay. So, yeah, that's a very famous story of divisiveness. It's good. I think even nowadays, Iago is almost used as a word of a person who splits people. All right, it's in the play Othello by Shakespeare, and his most trusted confidant, Iago, who he thinks he has total confidence in him that he's guiding him in the right direction, but actually Iago really hates Othello and is jealous of him and is trying to destroy his life. So he convinces him that his wife is being unfaithful, and convinces him to kill his wife. And then Othello does that, and then realizes the mistake he made and that he's been deceived by Iago. But the idea is that he was using very pleasant speech. He was coming off as a great close friend and saying to him, "Oh, don't you? Not. I'm trying to help you. Don't you see that your wife is doing this and this thing?" And not by any means letting on that he was an enemy. Whereas sometimes it could be that you are actually speaking unpleasantly, but nevertheless it has the same effect, whatever method you use. And then guba rangjen gaonagichir. So either for your own or somebody else's purpose, right? So that makes no difference here. For some of them it does. So for stealing, I don't remember what it said in here. In the case of stealing, I don't even know if it didn't specify. So I'm not sure to create the karma of stealing, whether it has to be for your own purpose. In the Vinaya, that's one difference I noticed between our Vinaya, the Mulasavastavardhan, and the Theravada Vinaya, is that to have the defeat of stealing, it has to be for you. If you steal for somebody else, it's still bompo, it's very heavy, but it's not a defeat. Whereas in the Theravada, it doesn't seem to make a difference. Right. So say somebody is very sick and you steal medicine for them, right? Some people might even say that's a virtuous thing to do, but it's not a defeat because it's not for your own purpose. But here it's saying it's for anybody's purpose, right? Whether it's for your own purpose or somebody else's. And then Tartukni, so duale. So then this is the compendium by a Sangha. The completion is Tani Yerachawe Nambarik Pachao. So that by splitting them, you know that they have split. So you have to know it, basically, to have the action be complete, which is interesting because, at least in the Vinaya, also, like for the downfall of splitting the Sangha, that's actually, in that case, even it doesn't even require them to be split in the Vinaya. All it requires is that you try to do it, and then you're reprimanded, but you refuse to relent, and you keep trying. But for the actual karma of splitting the Sangha, it comes when you split them. So it doesn't, but here it's saying you have to know it. So in that, it's a little different, right? Usually you'd probably know anyway, but there could be cases where it happens, but you're not aware of it. So he says, how is that? How? Yeah, we understand that to be the. We understand that to be. No. It's saying when you speak and they hear. So actually, tani yawachawe nampurik pachao must mean that they know that you're trying to split. The point is, when you speak words of divisiveness and they hear it, because of course the point here, now that I say it, this is the non-virtue of speech. It doesn't matter whether they split or not, right? It's saying when you speak words of divisiveness and they hear what you're saying, that's all. They understand what you're saying. It doesn't require that they divide for it to be the karma of speaking divisive words, which makes sense, right? Otherwise, like for lying, if they believe you, if they know you're lying, then it doesn't become the karma of lying. That doesn't quite work, right? It just means that they have to hear what you're saying, right? Okay, now tsiksu. So tsiksu means harmful, or really coarse speech. But how do you say harsh speech, right? So you speak in a word that's harmful to others. So kuning narsem kewe jirgerbesem cheno. So the basis is a person for whom you have a animosity, narsem. Yeah. And then sambala dushetan yomoni arshan, again, the discrimination and the affliction are the same as before. Right? So it could be that you're angry, that's probably the most likely. Or it could be that you're out of greed, so you're trying to intimidate them to get what you want. Or it could be out of ignorance. So you just speak in a rude way, not even really intending to harm anybody, but you just think this is good for their own benefit, to say this to them, right? So that's important to keep in mind, right? As I said, I think last week, I think it's really important to be careful of the words we use. People might take offense, even if we don't realize that what we're saying is going to hurt them. So we shouldn't. I don't think use calling people names and things like that, even if it's meant in a friendly or a joking way. I as a monk, I don't do that. Some people do, but I think I really try to avoid that. I think as a monastic, you're given a name by your ordination master, and then one of your vows of ordination is to use that name. So I don't think it's good to call people by another name. And they might laugh about it, but they might not actually like it. Right. Okay, then kunlong ni ngak supo mawado boho. So the wish to speak harsh speech. Jorwa ni, so the action is den mi den gayo rongwei riksam luki kyun le jorwaham. So the first point is that it's either true or untrue. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. So then it's insulting them. So rik is for their class, and luki kyun, so that they have some fault with their body, and you make fun of their handicap or something like that. Le kyun le jorwaham. Le jorwaham. Yeah. So then I laid kyun le jarwaham. Sorry, le jawa. So yeah, it just has to do with that you're pointing out the fault in their body. That's the point. And then sultram Sam means that for their ethical behavior, you criticize that they're not behaving properly. Kunji kyon le tsamde, or something to do with their behavior. So the first is their ethics, basically, and the second is just their behavior itself. Kunji kyon le tsamde, minyan permawo. So then you say something unpleasant. So in the case of the divisive speech, it didn't matter whether it was pleasant or not, but here it has to be unpleasant words. So that's also it talks about that in the Vinaya. Like if you criticize somebody with nice words, basically sarcasm, right? It actually says that's not a full downfall. It's still a fault, but it has to be actually words that mean the thing that means something that's harsh in your language. But I think sometimes it seems if you use sarcasm, it could often be worse, right? So it's still a fault, as we say in the Vinaya, so it's still negative action, but it's still to be avoided. But it's a question of which is more harmful. Probably just better to avoid them all. It might depend on the situation. What's more harmful? So then we have tartuk ni. So then the completion is dua from the compendium. Tani de langak supa meboho. So speaking harsh words. That's all. And then so it's clarified in the Abhidhamma Kosha Baisya, the auto commentary, that they have to hear you. It's not just saying it, although saying it is the beginning of the action, but to have the complete karma, they have to actually hear what you say. Okay, so then ngakya wejini, so then this is senseless speech. This is a much harder one to define, right? And even to translate. Sometimes they say senseless speech, idle speech, gossip. I don't think gossip is a good translation because it's too narrow. Gossip is not good to do, but the point is, it's not just that you're gossiping. Gossiping anyway, I don't know how people use it these days because it might change with the generations, but usually it would imply you're spreading rumors about somebody or this person did this or that, even if it's true. Whereas here, it's just talking about anything. You could just be talking about the political situation, but it's just that there's no particular, it's not constructive. But it's hard to define really when does it become not constructive. It could be good to talk about the political situation in a reasonable way. You have to think about it. I think one of the things, if it's not helpful, it's not like arguing about the political situation and with people who have incompatible views is probably senseless speech because it's not helping anybody. If nobody wants to listen to the other one, they're just talking to hear themselves speak oftentimes or to win the argument. And I think the main thing is to ask, why is it negative? When the text, it usually says because it just wastes time, right? If you're a practitioner, you only have so much time in the day, and also it takes energy, it's distracting. You be focusing on your practice or your study. But also I think it's that when people just speak whatever comes to their mind, oftentimes the motivation is going to be anger or attachment. And even if it's subtle, it might not be explicit anger, but they're just talking about things they don't like, or they're talking about things they do like. And this person is so attractive, or I would really like to have this amount of money, or something like that. So it just feeds those negative mental states. But it's, as then, you have to wonder where you can draw the line. I remember one time when I was young, I went to a Dharma teaching with a Kagyu Lama when I was a layperson, and he was talking about this, and somebody asked, well, what about talking to your therapist? Right? Because there you're just, I suppose, just talking about whatever. Maybe it's probably good to try to just keep it focused. But the Lama, he responded, well, that's very different because then it's therapeutic. You're doing it in a therapeutic atmosphere. Right? So it's like you're doing this as a way of helping to resolve your inner issues, and the person is wanting to listen. And it is quite different than just talking with people and nothing comes of it. You just rattle on about your problems, but they're not actually actively trying to find a solution for you, because that would be quite different. Even if it's not a therapist, you're talking about all the difficulties you're having to somebody who really is a good listener and is willing to help you to find more constructive ways to deal with the situation, and that's probably not considered idle speech. So it's harder to define it. And also, of course, with the Bodhisattva vow, that that comes into it. It's still idle speech, but it's one of the ones that it's often said in Bodhisattva vows that you have to learn how to use these things. I mean, in a reasonable way, right? In a helpful way. So if you just always keep to yourself and don't talk to people, it's harder to really benefit them. Sometimes you have to, as they say, talk their language, not just literally, but you have to speak to people in ways that are meaningful to them, and that you make jokes about things that are not dharmic, but people make people want to listen to you. So you have to be skillful in that way. But I tend to err on the side of caution. I mean, maybe I'm more conservative, but even when I teach in Bangalore, for example, I don't, unless people really insist, I don't go out to lunch with the students or just go and just talk on and on. I try to kind of do my thing and go. But some people would argue, and maybe rightfully, that there's a better, for them anyway, there's a better approach to. It's good to be more friendly and become part of the community, and people feel that you're just one of them rather than somebody very standoffish. So you have to see, to judge it. And that's, of course, a bodhisattva practice. And in the bodhisattva vows and in the commentaries, there's a lot of discussion about how to do that skillfully. It's good to reflect on that. So anyway, the basis is don me patan dembe dono. Okay. I see. So I was reading it almost like it was self-contradictory, but now I see it's two different things. So it's meaningless things or meaningful things, right? But if you read it in the Tibetan grammar, don mepa tang dempe dono, you could read it as saying a meaning that has no meaning, right? But the point is, it's saying meaningless and that which has meaning. So it could be that you're talking about meaningless things, or you're talking about meaningful things, but in the wrong context or with the wrong motivation. So the intention has, again, the perception is de la douche pahois. You recognize that it's meaningless, the meaningless speech. Now, oftentimes we don't really pay attention to it. Most meaningless speech happens because people just don't really bother to check their speech. But I think at some level they know what they're saying, and if they actually were asked, is this meaningless, and they might have to think back, well, was there any value in that? Right? So they might be aware of it, but is not choosing to acknowledge that awareness. But oftentimes also they might think it's very useful. They might think that this is a very useful conversation to be talking about politics or whatever. So it's hard to say that it should always, that they should be able to recognize it that way. And furthermore, the basis, it says, was meaningless or meaningful speech, right? So then the discrimination is recognizing that. So it's basically any speech, and then you recognize that it's bad. I'm not sure even where, what that excludes. You could debate about that. So Tsongkhapa himself says, Sepa Sanle Matsunkyong, he says, although it doesn't say anything more in the text than that, Dirani Jodebe Dun Denila, Dirdu Shepa Mepa Yint Mainde. So he's saying, yeah, that's clear. So he's saying it's not that you know it's meaningless. The point is that you know what you're saying. That's all. The intention, the thing that you're intending to say, you know that you're intending to say it. Rather than, you could say, well, that you're speaking meaninglessly, but you just said the wrong thing. You were trying to say some kind of dharmic advice, but the wrong words came out of your mouth. That's a different thing. Right? Dushimawinde. And here it says you do not need a person that's hearing you. Right? It's different from the other ones. So you're just talking to yourself. It's still the same thing here. So nyamboni subhagonongo. So again, any of the afflictions. And then kunlongni madrawa jungyao mawadabaho. So jungyao means Lord of what arises, but the point is just saying whatever comes to mind, letting whatever comes to mind dictate what you speak, what you say, what you speak. And madrawa is like unrelated, irrelevant. Maybe you could translate it. So things that are irrelevant to anything useful. Right? The Buddha used to say that whenever you speak, you should check: is this connected with the goal? Is it connected with the path of liberation? Right. So if you can draw some kind of connection, then it's useful. But if it's just to say whatever comes to mind, or just saying things because you want to speak, then it's very different. So then jorani ngakyawa mawat somboho. So then action is to to initiate speaking meaninglessly. And then tartuk ni ngakyo me simbaho. So once you said it, it's complete. So then he gives, actually it's good, he gives more examples. Right? What would it be? So it says ji duntan dempate. So there's 7 different examples or bases here of what it could be. So top mo tong sandruwa tong sumpatang gipermawa tong. So that's all one. So these are like these are more on the side of harmful things. So top mo is talking about quarreling. Right? You talk about who's fighting who. We might talk about wars. Sangdruwa is fault finding. Right? So you're just talking on and on about people who have faults. And then tsupa is debate. So I don't know if when we go to chura every night, it's meaningless. But they talk about that. They even discuss that in debate. What is a virtuous debate and a non-virtuous debate, right? It's a very different context. So in the context of debate, they do encourage you just to say almost whatever comes to mind. That it's almost like improvisation. I was telling Wangchuk that you have to learn how to improvise in debate, but it's all within the context of trying to examine the meaning of the text. And so even if you're using just a word debate, it's helping. Well, but we both have the agreement that we're doing this as a way of, if you point out faults in the way that I'm speaking, it's helpful for me to clarify what I'm saying, because if I can't say it clearly, it's likely I can't conceive of it clearly either. And then Geber Mawaho is wishing to divide, right? Gepa, yeah, the translation I think must have had division because I wrote it here, but Gepa in the Vinaya anyway, you have the 4 different kinds of disputes that can occur. And a Gepe Chir Tsopa, the dispute that occurs due to Gepa, is when people are arguing. So I say I say that the table is impermanent, you say it's permanent. We're arguing about that. That's called gepa. So that's like an argument. So it's maybe here it's like arguing. Because gepa, and they say, and it says in like Triangulation Ningpo by Tsongkhapa, his text Essence of Eloquence, it says if you use these kinds of these debating tools of the Madhyamaka, you should put it into practice. It shouldn't just be for shakipetsam. He says, like, for meaning just like become a good debater, not to prove yourself in debate. That's not the point. Or to gain renown. So that gepa is like this kind of quarrelsome debate, you could say, a divisive debate. And then chiropetenju. Then the next basis is chiropetenju sam dramse sangakla gawe lo. So this is interesting too. This is a complicated one. So with a mind that delights either in non-Buddhist text or in the mantras of Brahmins, then to give oral transmissions of them or to recite them and so forth. So the first thing, the main point here, just in terms of the meaning of the words, is that you might talk about them in a way that's constructive. Again, it talks about this actually in one of the debates that comes up about, like, there's a text, it's Wangchuk Nakpe Gyu. I don't know. I mean, that would be the Tantra of Black Ishvara. I don't know. That's a Samkhya text, apparently. And so there's a quotation, Kebu Rangjin Maya Namgyur Min. So the Purusha, the person, is neither the Namgyur, the Rangjin, which is the Prakriti, or the Namgyur, which is the manifestations of that. And that's in their philosophy. They believe that. But the point is that it says when a bodhisattva says that, is it a non-Buddhist text, the words that come out of his mouth? Right? There's a question of what makes it a non-Buddhist text. But the point is that then we debate, why would a bodhisattva say that? Well, it's because they're saying, well, some people say this is how we argue against this, or something like that. It's very different than talking about it in terms of that you actually accept these things. But even then, it's a question, well, can you accept non-Buddhist text? Huh? Is somebody here? Yeah. Well, we have the recording going, so I'll keep speaking. So, for those of you who are here, as I was saying, so If, for example, it says in the text that if you studying grammar is non-Buddhist text in the sense that it's not written specifically about Buddhist philosophy, but it's something that a non-Buddhist, or sorry, a Buddhist or even a Bodhisattva might actually study and profit from. So it's perfectly fine to discuss that. So what does it mean to take delight in these things? Now, in the Bodhisattva vows, also you have. I often mention this one. The Domeichiro Tenjutsun Chopa Chekyan de la Ga. So that means that there's two of the secondary faults for the Bodhisattva. One is that when it's not proper to put effort into it, then you put effort into a non-Buddhist system. So that it's really not useful. You spend too much time studying non-Buddhist things and neglecting your Buddhist studies. But the other one is that there's also contexts where you should do it, and Tsongkhapa talks at length about when it's actually good to do that as a way of being able to help people. But then that you don't take delight in. The main point is that it doesn't sway you from your Buddhist refuge. That's the main concern. That if you're not stable in your refuge and you start studying all kinds of other religious systems, then you might lose your sense of refuge as a Buddhist. So that's the point here when it's talking about with a mind of delight, then reciting the non-Buddhist texts. So next we have Nyam Takpae Mawa Mengak Tabutang. So that's like pitifully wailing cries of distress. So that's also an interesting one, right? So, for example, does it say that you shouldn't cry? I don't think so. I think that I know I have heard that some Buddhist teachers even saying that monks shouldn't cry, but I don't agree with that. But I think it's a matter of the context. It's probably better as a monk if you can avoid it, not to cry in public, or to even with other people around, unless it's really like a close confidant or a teacher, and you're talking about something that really is very emotional. But you have to be careful not to kind of get in this self-pity or kind of using crying, especially using it as a kind of manipulation that you want to, you cry to make people take because they'll pity on you and thereby they'll want to help you. But if it's an emotional release, I think it often might be necessary. If you just hold it in, that can be counterproductive. Especially it seems to be has to do with psychology. You could say perhaps of Western people might be different. It might be that for Tibetans, but I doubt it's that different. That they do seem to have less likelihood to just kind of suppress emotions. But at the same time, I think it happens, and so there might be cases where that they need to let that out. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of younger monks or even classmates who have come to me and cried at times, and it seems perfectly reasonable because they're talking about something very emotional or something that they didn't have any chance to talk to anyone else about before. So I think that's perfectly fine and probably better if they do that. But I think the point is when you're using it in the wrong way or you're just crying in public and in a way that kind of excessively. I mean, it says pitifully wailing, so there's a difference between crying versus just crying out and making a big show. So I think that's the main point here. It just becomes idle speech if you're just crying out and going on and on about it, right? You can have some degree of how far you go with it. But again, it's, as I said before, the whole dividing line between what is and is not idle speech is hard to draw. It takes a lot of experience and wisdom to see that. So then gipatang, tsipatang, gawar chipatang, garur chipamawatang. So this is about playing around. Like gepa is just joking around. Right? So again, there might be times when joking around is okay, but it's probably good to not do too much of that. It's not that necessary. Again, Lexok used to talk about that. Geshe Lexok, he said, because somebody had actually done a practical joke, and he was saying it's really probably not best for monks to play practical jokes. It's not really in accordance with the Vinaya. And we have, for example, you don't tickle a monk. I don't know if that's a practical joke, but there are other things like, I mean, there's one story in the Vinaya. It's not the actual downfall is not a practical joke, but it seems that it's kind of what it was about. So they had the group of six, who was the kind of the bully monks, and then there was the group of what is the
Group of nuns.
no, not there was 12 nuns, but I'm thinking how many were there were some actually good young monks that the elder group of six were jealous of them, so they often would get on their case. But I'm trying to think. I think it's 17 of them, and later it was 16 because the tickling one eliminated one of them. Right, so one of them they started they were they ended up being good monks, but when they were young, they were like many young people, just a bit naughty. So they started tickling one of their friends, and he laughed until he died. So then there was only 16. But in any case, in this story, I think it was before that. So there were 17 of them, and so the group of six, uh, they told them, let's have a contest of who can hold their breath longer underwater. So they because at the time you can't wear your clothes in the water. They didn't have bathing suits, so the young monks, they all stripped off their clothes and went in the water and went underwater. And then while they were holding their breath, and the six, they came out of the water and stole their clothes and ran away. Right. So they weren't stealing. They weren't thinking it's mine, but the point was they were hiding them. So they embarrassed them. So I could say you could say that's a practical joke, and obviously the Buddha said don't do that. I mean, but then the downfall is to hide somebody else's possessions. Right. But I think it's just it's mainly it's just a waste of time. But also it can lead to distrust, absolutely. Or you might think it's a joke, but to them it doesn't feel like a joke. It might actually be quite quite upsetting. Uh, but just telling lighthearted jokes probably is good. Sometimes it's good not to be too serious. So again, as I said, the line is not clear. And then sepa is just playing around, right? And then garwa chepa, so just I mean, that really just means making people happy. So I don't, I would say that you have to interpret it a bit, but the point is just saying things for the purpose of just making people smile rather than really any kind of content or meaning in it. And then gagur chepa, it's sort of the same thing. Gagur chepa is just like joyful behavior, right? Like you have that in the Bodhisattva vows also, chani rabdagola. So that means excitedly, um, yeah, like the uproariously laughing and so forth. That you just go out, you lose your restraint. But that's very important as a monk to maintain composure. So you can make a joke, and that's okay. But then just kind of waving your hands around and making a big show, that's quite a different thing. You have to be careful. Now, when you're debating, there's some room for that. You do want to wave your hands around. You do want to make a show, but in the context of the debate, right? And if you make a joke in debate, it can actually be very good if it's well done, right? You don't want to do it just to make a joke. And I've actually, one of my classmates who was very good at debate, and I think I may have mentioned before that it helped me a lot that he often scolded me. But I really learned from those because he told me very directly if something I was doing was not within the bounds of how we're supposed to behave in debate. And so when I was having a hard time answering, then I kind of made a joke answer and tried to evade the question. But he said, look, if you do that, then the whole thing just degenerates. We lose the serious atmosphere here. But at the same time, he would often laugh, and he would, often when he was winning the debate, he would make it into a kind of game. But that's encouraged. It's very good to do that because it really shows people, look, you really have a wrong view here. It's making people laugh the degree to which what you're saying is senseless. So if it's used in that context, it's very helpful. But if it's just a joke, you're not actually trying to debate properly. You're just making jokes. Oftentimes that happens in the debate exam because people and they're nervous because they're in front of a whole group of people and the judges, and they have to say something because they're trying to get a good score. So they'll say all kinds of ridiculous things, and everyone laughs. But I don't think it doesn't necessarily help their score. Dudzi dam mawatang. So dudzi is like commotion, right? So just talking and making a big uproar and commotion when there's no need. So, and that's kind of like not quite gossip, but like talking about how do you say? Maybe even gossip is the right word. What's the word? Like bar talk, something like that. So here it says kings and ministers and the country and stories of thieves and so forth, right? So you're just talking about what's in the news lately and in a not in any kind of obstructive way, right?
I think the way that's talked about, at least like in the Sanskrit, is tirachana vachas, like means like bestial talk. Or
Bestial
talking
talk.
like an animal.
Interesting.
This is what the translation of it.
Yeah. Okay. So then rarutang nyupatabu mawatang. So then speaking like a drunkard or a crazy person, right? And then lopertso en mao. So that's speaking with a wrong livelihood. That's quite different actually. And that also even becomes, in some sense, could even be considered lying in some context or harsh speech, depending, because mainly the wrong livelihood is going to be that you're, there could be many, but the 5 that are specified is that you make a show of being a great practitioner. Right? So you're speaking just because you want people to think you're a good monk, so they make offerings to you, or flattery, right? So that you flatter people in a way that just because that gives you some kind of control over them. You make them think that you really like them and they want to help you, and then hinting, right? So then when you don't directly say I want this, but you hint that, oh, it'd be great if you gave me this and this thing. So that's really just a manipulative way of getting what you want. And then one is extortion, so that's pretty blunt, and that could really be harsh speech. And then one is this very manipulative, is giving to get something in return, right? So you give your sponsor little gifts and make them like you, so that thinking that they'll give you a lot more back. So okay, so now it says draw mepatang chudhamidepatang. So irrelevant or non-dharmic or don't tamidempamawani, or speaking things that are not meaningful, right? Ngachi madrawatang kunin yomopadompatang. So that what does it mean? He says it's when the earlier and later parts of your speech are disconnected. That's often what happens, right? You're not actually having any coherent conversation. You're just talking and talking, and it goes around and around in circles, or just all over the place. So that's quite different than actually having a coherent conversation about something, right? So say you're talking about politics, right? It could be useful if you really try to understand what's going on in the political sphere. But if you're just saying this about this politician, then you're saying something else about another politician because you ran out of things to say about the first one, then it just becomes idle speech in that way. And then kune nyomabat dopatang, so that it reveals your afflictions, right? That it just your afflictions start to manifest because you're just allowing yourself to, without any restraint, to say whatever comes to mind. And then shegetang, so then it's talking while laughing, right? You can't control yourself and you keep laughing while you're talking. Lu lasopatan, singing, right? Lasopatan dokar ken lasopatang. So then you're like skilled in dancing, and I mean I'm not sure how that has to do with speech, but Latawe do. Oh, I say while you're watching. That's the point. So while you're watching a show, that's the idea. While you're watching the show, you should be focused on the show. I mean, even as a monk, you should be watching a show in the first place. But probably good if you're at a movie or something as a layperson, not to talk in the movie. It annoys other people. Dunas mawaho. So ngagi niepa dambo sum ngakil de numidugi luknil yukong. So there's two presentations he's saying. The first 3 non-virtues of speech, which is lying, harsh speech, and divisive speech, there's two different understandings. Some people say those are senseless speech in and of themselves. Some people say they aren't. But dirni ngamatan tumparsung, so he's saying here we accept the former, that it is. So basically, if it's lying, it's necessarily senseless speech. So you commit 2 non-virtues at once. Point is to use your speech in a constructive way and in a dharmic way. So if it's a non-dharmic way, then it's a waste of your speech and your capacity to speak. And so next we have nabzem gishi. So then the basis of covetousness, right? So now we have the mental non-virtues, which are a little different class than the other ones, for a number of reasons. One is that there doesn't have to be any physical action. It's not a physical action. And also that it's it's not something that as a monastic you actually have any vow against. Right? There is no way to break your monastic vows simply by how you think. Now, I gave an example last week. There are some semi-exceptions. For example, that you borrow something and then you just think, I'm not giving it back, and then it's stealing. But the point is, it's still it's considered a physical action because it's the karma, it's the action of stealing, even though the actual thing you did was not physical in that context. Whereas here, it's just purely the way you think. So as a monastic, the only way it wouldn't actually break your monastic vows per se, but if you decided for certain that there is no Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and there's no karma, and no effect of your actions, then you would lose your monastic vows. But that's not actually breaking a vow. It's just that it's called undermining the basis for having the vows, that you no longer have any real sense of this being something, of yourself being a monk in a way that's in accordance with how the Buddha understood it, that you're practicing for liberation. But that's different than here. It's talking about creating non-virtue through mind. So the first one, covetousness, is shengi nor tang yochedo. So the basis is somebody else's property or their possessions. And then sampalasumle, so then the intention, or the thought has three. So first is that you know that it's their property, right? And yomoni sumbagano, so again, any of the three afflictions. And then kunla, so covetousness out of anger, it could happen for sure, that you really don't like somebody and you think, I'd like to take away his cars because that'll harm him, right? So it's the causal motivation is any of the three afflictions, but the action itself, of course, is attachment. And then kunlongni dagir chawa dobo, so you want to make it your own. And then joani sampedon de la sorachipo, so then making it is exertion towards that thing, right? I mean, really, do you have to do anything, right? It says exertion towards it, but it could just mean that you're mentally exerting, because that's an important point, I think. Really, when does it become the non-virtue? So if you just get angry at somebody, is it a non-virtue of harmful intent? I think it really depends on how you relate to that anger, because there is a danger that if you think too much about mental non-virtue and you're then afraid to have certain thoughts, then that becomes a cause for repressing them or not acknowledging your own anger, and then not skillfully dealing with it. There was an interesting pamphlet I read that we got from Venerable Fedor. I don't know if you know him. He used to be a monk at Sarah. He's still a monk, but he's not here anymore. And he teaches now in Germany. So he was talking to somebody, because this also has to do with mindfulness meditation, which is very popular these days. And there was a question of, I think it was a psychologist who practices dialectical behavioral therapy, which if I recall, it's, I mean, the idea is that to help somebody to acknowledge their emotions, right? I mean, I think dialectical behavioral therapy is often for people who are borderline personality, if I recall. I'm trying to remember the actual details of it, but the point anyway, regardless of what dialectical behavioral therapy really actually is defined as, is that the psychologist was saying that you're saying that when you have anger, you should apply an antidote. But I find when I work with my patients, the most important thing is that they become aware of their anger and acknowledge the anger, and actually can express the emotion to themselves. So they came to the agreement that, in some sense, what they're not disagreeing, that they're saying. So Venerable Fedor was saying, maybe it seems like in order to apply the antidote, you first have to even know you have the emotion. But the point is, once you are aware of it, then you decide to apply an antidote rather than act on it, right? And the antidote, and then it would get, I think, what they call cognitive behavioral therapy is very much about that you try to change the way of thinking, right? That's the main antidote, is to try to diffuse the situation, because especially with anger, it's usually a matter of having a very exaggerated picture of what's going on, not 100% of the time. Or I mean, according to Buddhist philosophy, it is 100% of the time, but at least in terms of Western psychology, I think Aaron Beck, who's a cognitive behavioral therapist who met with His Holiness, I think he said it was like 90%, according to his research. It wasn't just a guess. He was like actually researching and checking, when people get angry, what is the reason? That 90% of the time, it was coming from them and not from the object. So the idea is that the main antidote is going to be changing the way that you conceive of the situation. So, but just to have the feeling of anger, have the feeling of wanting something is more the ripening of a previous action. But then once that comes into your mind, what happens? That is then what becomes a new action. So sampai don de lat so chipo and tartukni. So what is the completion? Is their doggy chawang nipo. So you make the determination, I'm going to make this mine. Right? Shesungde. So that could be very strong. Right? It's an interesting book we have in the library. I may have mentioned it before. It's quite unique. It would be nice if we had more books like this, actually. Called A Guided Tour of Hell. It's by, have you seen this? No? It's by the founder of Shambhala Publications, Samuel Burschultz, who was a student of Trigam Trungpa Rinpoche. And he had a near-death experience where he visited hell. This happened not that long ago. It was long after because he says that actually early on as a Buddhist, he didn't really believe in these things. As he got older, he maybe had a little bit more of a grounded view of things. He was a hippie, as it looks like to begin with, and kind of had a view of spirituality as a bit trippy, you could say, or maybe a bit like just seeing the good things and not really caring that much about the bad aspects of it. So the book is interesting to see his own development, but also his description of what he sees, sort of like Dante's Inferno, just a little bit less eloquent, but still interesting. So anyway, the reason I bring it up is that a lot of the people he claims to have encountered seems like they were suffering the results of their mental actions and not anything they did physically. Like there's one woman who was just jealous her entire life, and then she's suffering the results of that, or somebody who was very proud. It looks like somebody who thought that they were superior to other races or things like that. So it's one person's account, but it's interesting to think about that. It's also in Dante's Inferno, for what it's worth. I don't know if we can take that as a authoritative text, but nevertheless, it claims to be somebody's experience of visiting hell. And a lot of the people he visits, I think that's the first circle of hell, is the circle of the covetousness, if I recall. Right? So just people who have a negative mind. That's the determination, really, of what makes it most negative action, is the mental state. So even if there's not a physical action, the fact that you hold on to a negative mind your whole life can be very powerful. So then, so then it's when you think, I'm going to make that wealth mine. That's just Tsongkhapa's interpretation of what the Sangha said. So Dela Napsem Yonsu Zopala Chongat Sangodis. This is interesting. In order to become a fully fledged mind of covetousness, it has to fulfill 5 conditions. So Rangi Longchola Lapar Chape Sem Tandempas. You have a very strong mind of excessive attachment to your possessions. Right? And then Longcho Super Dupe Kamchaki Sem Tandempa. You also have a strong mind that's grasping at gaining more possessions. And Shengi Norla Zopa Sambolo Yonsu Dokching Roni Anwar Chepe Chumpe Sem Tandempa. So here it's that you, out of a mind that sees others' possessions as very attractive, and as zangpo, it's like as very good thing, something desirable. You have the yongsu dokching, so you think again and again about that. You build it up as this great thing, and then ronyang war chepe, and then experiencing. It's ronyang means like tasting it, like you have a very strong attachment to it. Out of that, then chumpa, which anyway the translation has as longing. I'm trying to remember. We had this in Dua in Vinaya, the chumpa, but that's the idea: is that you're just you're fixated on the object. You're just yearning to gain that thing. And then shendaki gangyempa de daki gyurchik nyampa kuwe sem tandempa. So you have an envious mind. And kuwa, it is envy, but it also has a bit of a negative tinge, right? So you're kind of wanting to possess this, even though it's maybe detrimental to them. So you wanting to make it mine. And then napsem de motsawa meching. So without any sense of shame in that, right? You don't think that this is the wrong way to think, right? That you don't have a sense that I hope that this is inappropriate. I am a sense of integrity is how I think we're talking about how to translate this. You don't have a sense of integrity that this is not really an appropriate way for me to think. And then yemek le neighbor mejepa. So you don't really think about or understand the consequences that this would be. So you is one thing if you really want it, but you think I really shouldn't take that because it would just be really bad, have very bad consequences. Then it's not a full action. You're wanting it. The only thing that's really stopping you from acting maybe is that you can't get it. But there's no sense of it would probably be better, even though I really want it, I shouldn't take it. So silginumpe, meshepe silginobisem. So your mind is overpowered by that. That's the point. Sem tandembo ho. So semte gambo garon shik natsangna. So if you don't have any of those five, nabzeki zenim is okso. Does not become a full mind of covetousness. Migewa chukala najuchibawe za jorwal sungsu. This is a bit of a hard for me to understand actually. It says for all 10 of the non-virtues, it says in the yogic, what do you say? Yogic, what's the word in Sanskrit? Yoga charya, I guess you would say. The practices of yogis. How do we say? I mean, it's really yeah, that's what it is. Yoga charya bhumi, right? It's the bodhisattva, the grounds of paths of yogis. It includes the bodhisattva bhumi and the shravaka bhumi. So that's Asanga's text. So he's saying you should apply this to all 10. So that would imply that in order to have a full action of killing, you have to have very attached to your own possessions, wish to have others' possessions, build them up strongly in your mind, have a mind of envy, and have no sense of shame. But it's hard for me to see how that would make any sense, that you would need all those to complete to have a full action of killing, right? I'm not sure. So then, I guess the main point is that in order for it to become a full negative action, you need some affliction in your mind, right? That is clear, but still, it seems a bit maybe making it a bit too broad. Usually, or really too narrow might be the better way to put it. That it makes it actually pretty hard to have a full action of killing. So yomsomazopes nabsem segurutsuni. So how does it become not a complete action of covetousness? He lists 6. How many ways? Quite a few. Yeah, 6 different ways. So kimgi jepon de dagi twende gurchik chitapa shindu girna chimiro wanyapatang. So this is not a full action of covetousness. It's saying, I mean, kema is like alas, or how, like, wouldn't it be great? Kimgi jepon de dagi gendu gyurchik. So if that master of the house, Kimgi jepon, if he were to become my servant, wouldn't that be nice? Right. So it's not quite that I'm actually wanting to go and possess him. It's just thinking this person has a slave, basically. Wouldn't it be nice if he was serving me? Right. So that, of course, a lot of people might have that, but it's not fully covetousness. And then de bu tang chumal tang chumasok tang sela sope lugio chalayang ter sempas, and thinking the same thing about somebody's son or his wife or his food or his body. So just thinking, if I could have a body like that, wouldn't it be great, right? And then kema. So again, kema, it's this expression of lament, right? Alas. Dak dopa Dota bachungwatang rabdu wempatang, sundrut sampatang mangrutupatang, tomwait sulchenla ngang sulchenla soba, shengi shena, chimiro nyampa. So it's thinking how wonderful it would be if everybody knew that I have so few desires. So it seems to contradict itself, right? If everybody knew that I'm such a pure monk, if everybody knew that I live in isolation, meaning that I keep myself, keep to my practice and don't focus on, don't get carried away with other things. And if they knew how much effort I put, how much joyous effort I put into my practices, if I knew how learned I was, if they knew how generous I was, right? So you could imagine that happening. But the point is that it's not that it's a positive action, but it's not a full mind of covetousness. And then dakla gyalputang, tepuntang, kornam shi, kori chepatang, sego sok topna chimironyapatang. So wouldn't it be great if the king or the leader of the land or the four types of followers, right? Lay followers, monks and nuns, if they showed respect to me, if they praised me and gave me service. And then sego sok topna, if they gave me food and clothing, how wouldn't it be great? And then kema dak chimala harkene de doyong alat sewatang. So alas, again, wonderful if in the next life I could be born as a god and enjoy the 5 sense pleasures of a god. Trakbo tang kyabjuki juk jikden tang. So if I could become trakbo, how do you translate it in Sanskrit is urga, I think. Urga. It means like powerful or violent. But it's another word for Shiva, I believe. Yeah. And then Kyabjuk is Vishnu, right? Kyabjuki jikden ne shentruo wang chedu kewra. So if I could be born in the gods who control other emanations, that's one of the god realms, right? Kewra Girche, if I could be born there. Now I have a note here, it's a question, because isn't that a virtuous set mind? We're talking about the path, the practices in accordance with the lower capable being where you're wanting to be born as a human or god in the next life. That's the mind you're trying to cultivate. So it's questionable. What does that mean? At that point, I think the point is you want to be born as a human or god because you want to have the ability to practice Dharma, or at least you want to have a virtuous life, rather than just thinking. I mean, we could apply that to a human realm, right? You could just think, in my life, next life, couldn't I? If I wish I could be rich and be the king and have all the sense pleasures. So it's really just attachment to those sense pleasures. But at the same time, if it motivates good actions, there's that story of Nanda, you might know, right? Then the Buddha told him, if you practice well in this life, you'll have all the blissful pleasures in the God realm, and that was why he ordained. So it could lead to virtuous actions. And then finally, pamatang putang chumatang drenla sopa tang sangpat sungpa chupe yochila do barakena yang nabzemo. So then you wish for, it's saying that you wish for, I mean, it's questionable whether maybe you just have to apply this to all of them, because wish for parents wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. But I think it means the possessions of your parents. Because the last point here is that the possessions of a renunciate, right? So you have to apply that to all of them. So you're wishing for your parents' possessions, or your child's possessions, or your wife's possessions, or your slave's possessions, servants' possessions, or the possessions of somebody who's practicing celibacy, which means a renunciate. So that's also covetousness, he's saying. So he's saying it's covetousness, but it's not a full action of covetousness, right? It doesn't have all the 5 factors from before. So we'll finish not the harmful intent, but then the wrong views, I think, is pretty complex, so maybe we can talk about that next week. So then the harmful intent is the basis of harmful intent, and the perception and the affliction is all the same as it was in the context of harsh speech, right? So you have to look back there. It's so a person with whom you have a kurinamsam. How did I translate that before? A mind of animosity. Yeah, and then you have a correct perception of them as who they actually are, and you have any affliction. So you could see, of course, that could come from desire, that you want to kill them because you want to possess their possessions. So, but the actual action here is to have the mind of harm. we debated this, and I don't feel like I quite got a good resolution of it yet, right? Because there's different mental states. There's harmful intent, nosem, and then namtse, which is violence, or again, it's hard to translate namtse. And then there's just shedang, which is like hatred. And are they the same, or how are they different? Is one a particular kind of another? There's quite a lot of disagreement about that, and we just went through this last month in our text. So it's clear there's different kinds of anger. So we talk about the secondary afflictions like troa. That it makes it pretty clear. Troa is like malice, so that means that you're like when somebody's right in front of you. That's what it says in the text, that you're actually wanting to hurt them right now. So it's like an eruption of anger right in the moment. Whereas konzin is holding a grudge. It says, so that's much later. It's happened a while ago, but it's like a low level of thinking about it. Or it's sikpa. Sikpa is translated as spite usually. And in colloquial, sikpa means you're annoyed. But my classmate was saying, because in the text it says dikpa. What is it? Digbala lepertau or something like that. But the point, dikba, it looks like it says the word negative action. That's how the translator, I think, made a mistake there. He translated it as, inclination towards negativity. But actually, my classmate was saying dikba also is a form of the verb to threaten someone. So he was saying that in my payul, like in my area of Tibet, that's what we talk about when somebody they just really like to threaten people and say things that kind of bully people around, and that's what we call them tsikpa. He said, tsikpa tsapo. Yeah. So that's the idea. It's like somebody who just has a generally bullyish nature. So it's a different kind of anger, right? So there's all different kinds, but the one that not specifically nosem and shedang. One of my teachers says he thinks that shedang and nosem, which is hatred and harmful intent, are synonymous. I am skeptical of that. His reasoning is that because it says in the Bodhisattvacharya Vatara that there is no negativity like anger. Shedan taba dipume. So if that was the case, if that's the most strong negativity, why is that not one of the 10 non-virtues? So thereby it should be that you'd have to say, well, harmful intent, that's what it means. But I'm not convinced by that, because I think harmful intent would imply that you actually want to harm someone. It's a little different than being angry. Like you can be angry at an inanimate object, right? But you wouldn't say you have harmful intent towards an inanimate object. And actually it's clear here, it has to be a sentient being. Even it says in the Abhidharma, no sem la dangwa. So it's hatred towards sentient beings is what it says. So maybe we could say in the context of sentient beings, it's not harmful intent. In the context of something else, non-sentient, then it's not harmful intent. We'll get that actually later. We didn't debate that point yet, so we'll see what they say. So now we have kunlong ni, dekpala superdupate. So this is the wish to strike somebody and so forth. Sepat. So then he's saying that and so forth, what does it include? Sepa, killing. Jingwa, the binding. Shenam, in any other way. Rangi ngangi longchu gyuna chimirungyam desokso. So then thinking things like, wouldn't it be great if their possessions went to ruin? Something like that. So jorwani, so in the action, sampadela jorwa chipaho. So then just the point is that you just make that thought manifest in your mind. And then tartukni, dekpa sok chawa nipra am tachepaho. So they're making the firm decision, I'm going to beat them, or I'm going to do something else similar. So deang ngat sangna zokla masana mazokte. So then it also needs 5. So okay, this is more clear here. See, it wasn't clear before. I said all the 10 negative non-virtuous actions require these 5, but it's different for each of them. Because here it's clear, there's 5 regarding the mind of harm that are different than the 5 that had to do with the mind of covetousness. But maybe you could extrapolate what they are if you knew the other 5. So you could know, the point is you have to have some kind of mental state related to each of them with these 5 factors. So here, it's nuchigi gyud la deran tumpe chu semerzimpe shirangi semtang. So As for the cause of that harm, something that's harming you, that you perceive as that, so you have a mind of hatred based on apprehending. It's often used as the kind of true existence. Like you're clinging to this as real. This is a real cause of harm to me. And then nupa chepala mizupa. Now, of course, to me, it doesn't have to be, right? It gives the example. It is not here. I forget where it is, but he says there's 9 reasons, right? It's that they harmed me, they're harming me, they will harm me. They harmed my friends and family, they will, they are, they did, they will, they are now. Or that they helped my enemies, or they're helping my enemies now. So it's not necessarily me, but it's that somehow it's coming back to me. And no percepa la misope, misopesem. So you have to have a mind that's not tolerant of their harm, right? That has a mind of just it can't bear this, and rather than patiently accepting it. And then yang tang yang du su shin minpar kontro gyu yila chepa. So then this is very important, right? You have to again and again through what's called non-appropriate mental engagement, which means that you come up with all the reasons why what they're saying is harmful to you, or what they're harmful. Right? Your mind creates this whole situation. So you have mindfulness, right? I mean, Trentba mindfulness. The point is, it's negative mindfulness. If you forget, you're not going to be angry anymore, right? But you keep in mind always, this person did this thing to me, right? So that often happens. People, they keep in mind for years and years that this person did such bad thing, and then you never see all the good things they've done in the meantime, right? So it's what your mind focuses on. So kondus and beisan, so it's that you hold on to a grudge about them, right? It may be in the the present moment, but the idea is that you're holding on to it. You're not letting go of the problem. There's a very nice verse by the first Dalai Lama in the prayer Lekdrima. I used to have it in memory, but I don't now. But it's just saying that he calls it the fire of anger, right? And free me from the fire of anger. It's a prayer to Tara, and it's incited by the winds of wrong mental engagement, and that's what incites your anger. Then the fire that consumes the forest of virtue in just an instant, that is the anger. So then dekbatang sena chimurong nyamba kuesem. So you see, kua doesn't mean enviousness. That the translator had translated enviousness in the context of the not of the covetousness, right? But here they're using it for anger. So it's really, I said kuesem is like it's not quite harmful intent, but it's a mind of animosity. So it's saying the mind that thinks it's kua, so animosity in the sense of thinking how great it would be if they got beaten or if they were killed. And nosem kepala ngotsa meching. So you have no shame in yourself, no integrity of sense of this is wrong to have this kind of harmful intent. This is the same as before. You also don't see it as a problem. You don't think that I shouldn't think this way. I shouldn't, because this would have bad consequences, even if it's just for me. And then so then you're overpowered by that. That's often why criminals behave, and they do things that if they sat back and thought about it, they would think this is going to get me arrested. But in the heat of the moment, as they say, it doesn't always work that way. So then sem nga tandembaho. So you have those 5 minds. So no sem sam de gyurvani. So then, like before, a mere mind of harmful intent, which means it's not a complete mind, it's just like a mildly harmful intent. So dini dakla no per chepe sam chepe nyamne. So they're thinking that he harmed me, or this person or whatever thing harmed me or is harming me. They let no per chawe cheer. So in order to harm him, jinye sempa dinye tamche no semyenla. So whatever kinds of things you think about ways to harm him, those are harmful intent. You think, what if great if I could do this or that, right? Your mind is planning, but it's not fully decided on it. It's just like conceiving of different ways you could harm him. And then Dei Shindu Shengi Nian Tong Long Chu Tang Gewalasopa Tsedela Nyapr Mibatang. So then thinking, wouldn't it be having the wish that in this life that they're their relatives or their possessions or their virtue would decline in this life. And then Chimala Ngenjo Songna, I'm just thinking how great it would be if they went to the hell in the next life, you could say, or the unfortunate migration. So Mobayang no sem so, wishing for that. Now that's something you have to be careful about, right? That can happen. Somebody harms you and you think, well, I don't need to pay them back. They'll get their own payback. Something like that, right? So of course, it's good that you didn't act on it, you didn't respond, but you want to be careful how you think about things. And that's also, especially with it, if you have, well, you don't now, so I won't talk about that. But in the contract of the Tantra vows you take, then especially it has to do with, not having animosity towards anyone, basically. But we can discuss that later. Because then it's really contrary to the practice of a bodhisattva if you think, that I'm not going to harm him, but he'll get what's coming to him. You have to have compassion for people. It's not, I mean, of course, it's understandable. You get a little upset when people say negative things to you, and I think it's very different if it just comes in your mind versus actually making a decision that you want this. So if you recognize this mere, you could say, this mere harmful intent, but then you recognize it as a fault and try to apply some kind of antidote to it, it's very different than the going to the complete action where you decide, certainly I'm going to do this. Okay, so that's good. We can finish for now for today, but if you have questions, let me know. Anything coming on the chat?
Nothing so far.
Okay.
But I guess I could ask a question in the meantime.
Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah. So
please.
There was the one part about the sort of idle chatter.
Yeah.
Relating to sort of talking about say non-Buddhist religions.
Yeah.
Engaging in non-Buddhist religions.
Mm.
I guess I'd be interested to know because especially when this was written by Lama Tsongkhapa in Tibet, I imagine it was really written in an area where there was no religion other than Buddhism.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I wonder when he was this, I guess how would he kind of relate to say people like Atisha or Shantarakshita who were very they wrote a lot very extensively about Hinduism, Jainism.
Yeah, it's a very complex question, and I think you could see. I think you walked out while I was talking about this, but for me, this is something that we have to be very careful. It's not just a matter of we shouldn't talk about other religions, or even that we should not have some sense of respect or joy for other religions, or even gain something from their teachings. So I'm very careful with that. But at the same time, the main thing is that if it causes you to kind of lose your refuge, and then also just to kind of go back and forth, you follow this path and you follow this path, and you don't get anywhere. It becomes very light. You don't really go deeply into either of them. But that seems to have been an issue in Tibet. I know, to give another example, I was reading, we have a very nice book in the library. I think it's one of the best books I've ever read. Holy War. I don't know if you've, Karen Armstrong. She's an excellent author about religious studies. And so that book is about the Crusades. It's very eye-opening. I didn't know a lot of the information, but you see the degree to which that style of thinking that was cultivated during that time and now is affecting the world today. But one of the things that she shows in that book is that in the Middle Ages anyway, Europe was not cosmopolitan. It was just purely Christian. They didn't know anything about Muslims. Whereas the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire, was always interacting with them. And they had a much more leveled view of them. Whereas the Europeans were the ones going to extremes because they'd never met them. And so they had, for example, I guess it's better not to mention it, but there's one person who was a saint. He's recognized as a saint by the church, but he explicitly said that it is virtuous for the Christians to kill Muslims because they were essentially, as I recall, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it basically was along the lines of that God created them as a way for the knights of Europe to enhance their virtue by going and killing them. Right? This is quite extreme views, but these are the kind of things people come up with when they don't actually meet somebody or actually interact with them. So using that as an example, fortunately the Tibetans were not that extreme. There's no Tibetan text about going and killing other religions, but nevertheless, when you read about their accounts of other religions, it's often, I mean, it's clear they'd never met these people, and it led to perhaps consequences in the country. I mean, I've often mentioned that we can see that by 1930, 40, just before Tibet lost their independence, that it was a very xenophobic country. Not just about religion, but about anybody. They didn't want to have any influence from external and even let people in the country. And they would punish people within their own country who went abroad and learned about other cultures. So that seems quite dangerous and extreme. So I think it's actually very useful, and especially in today's world. I mean, can you imagine? Wouldn't have be very good for even just the view of others of Buddhism if it was like we don't interact with other religions, we don't attend interfaith conferences. And I've even heard that people have said that to me, that at interfaith conferences, the monks from other Buddhist traditions tend to be more open to other religions. Like Theravada monks seem to be more open and willing to just have dialogue with other religions in a meaningful way, whereas the Tibetan monks that sometimes come off as a bit like, well, we know and we don't have a lot to gain from listening to other people. I certainly don't think that's the case with all Tibetan monks. I know many of them, but I can see that pattern sometimes forming, and it comes a bit from this insularity of just studying our texts and not only knowing the other religions through what it says in our text, which is essentially negating them. There's also the story I've heard several times now, and this was in Varanasi. Apparently, there was I think I may have mentioned this to you even. I don't remember when it was, maybe like 20 years ago. There was a debate between the Buddhist and the Vaisheshika scholars, and the Buddhist scholars prepared themselves by reading Dharmakirti, who negated the Vaisheshikas in the 6th century. So they lost the debate because they didn't even bother to read that Vaisheshikas have now reformed their system as a response to Dharmakirti. So they no longer have the flaws that Dharmakirti was pointing out. And so that you kind of lose touch with what's going on and assume very strongly that our way is right. So for me, it's been a very big part of my life as a monk, is we have this big library here. Again, Jabba Keldon, he's the one who encouraged us to do it this way, and I've continued that tradition. I've read a lot of things that are not Buddhist, and I think it's enhanced my practice, and to a significant extent, it has also caused me to doubt a lot of the aspects of the Buddhist religion, but I think in a way that's necessary, at least for me. Because if it's, as His Holiness often says, if it can be proven conclusively that it's wrong, then we should abandon it. So I think it's very important not to just think that we can't study other things because it will shake our faith. Maybe it needs to, but at the same time, I think there is something to be said for knowing the time and the amount. Like so I mentioned in the Bodhisattva vows is this talk about when you study other Buddhist texts. I mean, not other texts of other religions, and who in what way. And one of the things it suggests, which I think is good advice, is make sure you spend 2/3 of your time studying Buddhist texts and not more than 1/3 of your time studying non-Buddhist texts. It doesn't detract from your study of Buddhist texts. Now, even that I have some questions about, because what if somebody wants to be a doctor, for example, they're a layperson? Seems very incompatible with the Buddhist lifestyle and as a Bodhisattva practitioner to become a doctor, but then you have to go to school, and if you're studying 10 hours a day to become a doctor, then you have to study 20 hours of your Buddhism. You got 30 hours in the day, and that doesn't quite work. So I think even that has to be flexible. But the point is, it could be. You have to be careful if you're going to just spend 7 years in medical school. if you're not that stable in your practice, you might lose your Buddhist faith and your understanding of the Buddhist text. So there is something you have to take it seriously. But anyway, in that context, Tsongkhapa gives different criteria. Like if you fulfill these criteria, then it will be very good to study non-Buddhist texts. So some of them are that, for example, you have to have very good memory. You have to be intelligent enough that you can understand all these different things, and that you won't just, because if you only can understand a few things, you can't study all these different vast things and keep them all in mind. And especially you're stable enough in your refuge that it won't harm your refuge. So it's useful to look at those factors also and see if, does this apply to me? And you might kind of know for yourself whether you fulfill that or whether that works for you. Oh yeah, and I was going to say, so in the Vinaya even it talks about this. It's not even in the Bodhisattva practices. It talks about Shariputra, who was known to be very wise and learned, and it says that he was studying non-Buddhist systems and coming to understand them, and somebody accused him, but this has happened quite a few times in the Vinaya. It seems that Shariputra was accused of doing something because it did contradict something the Buddha had said. He said not to get involved with the religions of the other sects. So somebody said he's doing this, but then the Buddha said, well, in his case, there's permission. He can do it because it's actually very beneficial the way that he's approaching it. And then again, later somebody accused him and said that he's spending so much time on it. At least he shouldn't spend so much time learning about the non-Buddhist systems. But then the Buddha said, actually, he can do it as much as he wants. Right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that applies to everybody. But for somebody like Shariputra, who has a very broad mind, is very stable in their practice, then it can be very beneficial. And of course, it's not just other religions today. It's a big thing also about science, right? But it certainly, would seem quite dangerous to say, well, monks shouldn't study science and shouldn't be aware of science. But certainly people say that. But it would seem that could be very counterproductive for the person themselves and for the Sangha as a whole. But at the same time, not to just make that your only focus, right? You don't become a monk and then go to school and become a scientist as a monk. I think I would advise against that usually. I mean, if somebody was already a monk for 10 years, it's a little different. But if it's like they become a monk and then just are in medical school, it's very hard to maintain their practice. So, okay. Is there any question there?
Yeah, no questions.
Okay. Okay, so that's good for today then. 사주보기 조심해도 Dhamri Nudegyam Pade Sangye Jindu Mede Buagim Runanda Jinlam Tubaro Jizalame Kudzeraden Jinam Kadrile Chochuge Param Lozatembe Rome Sasumgi Rue Monsedadum Negyo Jigiram Guanamandala
From my two collections,
Vast the space that I've amassed from working with effort of the expressive for a great length of time, may become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all my lives, Manjushri. May I complete the teachings and please all the Buddhas with my practice.
Using my skillful
Means wrong by the strong force of compassion, may clear the minds of beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. Hold the Buddha teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. In the minds of those whose bliss liberation be granted as boundless peace, Buddhas be ours for a long time, by even this graded path to enlightenment completed through the wondrous, virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. And how many human beings who eliminate the diversity and practice the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from and create conducive circumstances for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives. The purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones. The oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. Okay, thank you.
Hey, how'd it go? Yeah, yeah.